Hello, and welcome to another edition of Quarantine the Past. My name is David Coleman, and I'm joined by Juan Rodriguez, and we're going to be talking about February's releases. We're going to go through all the albums that impacted us, that we either enjoyed or we didn't enjoy so much, and we're going to try and shine a light on some unheralded picks, and also talk about some of the bigger releases as well. Now, we have a trend on Quarantine the Past to sometimes relegate hip hop releases to a bit of an afterthought. So we're going to invert the usual proceedings and start with hip hop this month. So Juan, I think the first record we wanted to talk about was the Maxo record. I think you were quite a fan of. Do you want to tell us and the listeners a little bit about Maxo?
I sure can. So Maxo is a California rapper. It's his second album for Def Jam. His album is called Even God Has a Sense of Humor. And what resonated to me with this one is that in the beginning of the year, I've had a hard time connecting with a lot of the sampling work early into the hip hop albums that I've heard this year. And this one kind of stood out for me over the rest. Like it feels very in tune with what he was trying to create. Like it's not the kind of album where it's like a lot of my favorite albums of last year that were hip hop were a little bit more on the grim or dour sounding spectrum, which is refreshing for me that this one was a little bit more of a bomb, refreshing bomb, right? I mean, and just to give a little bit more context, it's the kind of album where he's kind of expanding his view on this one instead of it being a portraiture of his life, which was more what the first record was about.
Okay.
And so those are some things that stood out. Also Liv, which we're going to talk about, also cameos in a track. So there you go. Yeah.
So it's everything is linked, huh?
So everything is linked, yeah.
I haven't heard this record, but I remember you saying about the Sky Zoo record that we talked about last time, that it was the sampling that kind of just held it back a little bit for you. So
a little bit, yeah. And maybe I think it has to do a little bit more with the production, because I also know that Dom Maker of Mount Kimby fame produced it.
Okay.
So that also I tend to like Mount Kimby records a lot, how they sound, and I think I see some commonalities there too in the production. Although you're mostly going to go for like Maxo's kind of clever wordplay, he's really good at it, and yeah, I feel like this may even grow on me with time. I already like it a lot, and I feel like same thing with Sky Zoo. Even Sky Zoo has been growing on me too.
Yeah,
so
I think it's a strong record. So a pretty good start to the year. The record from February that stood out for me in the hip hop realm, although also crossing over into some more avant-garde R&B and also some kind of futuristic pop as well, was the Wesley Joseph record, Glow, which is his first, hesitate to call it an album, really. I think it's only about 18, 19 minutes. But it's got enough ideas on there to justify the tag as an album. I think it's a really strong introduction to his work if you haven't heard any of his earlier self-released stuff. Just demonstrates a lot of range. He's a UK artist, showing a lot really in a short run time. So that is one to check out as well. Glow. That's my recommendation from Wesley Joseph.
Yeah.
I think you've heard it. Maybe you weren't quite as blown away as me.
I can't speak a lot about it. I know that when I gave it a cursory listen, you got to remind me. I feel like the first few tracks were a little bit more involved in terms of the production, but then it kind of simmers a little bit. And I think that's when I was enjoying it more. But yeah, it was more like very ethereal kind of sounding synths like in the beginning. And I think he's trying to go for, also, I mean, I might be wrong, but his vocal delivery reminded me a lot of what like Puerto Rican reggaeton singers do in his own way, which is very interesting. Very weird mixture there, but I don't know. I'll give it another shot. It was one of those that I really have only heard once.
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on there, as I said. So I think it is something that unveils itself after a few more listens, and it's short enough to kind of justify giving it a few extra listens, because you're not investing that much, but you'll get something back. I think you'll enjoy it. So that's Wesley Joseph. Liv, you mentioned already, popping up as a cameo on the Maxo record. Also another strong record from February.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't know. Have you like had a chance to listen to this one? Because this was one of the albums this month that I knew about it last month because I'd gotten some press releases about it, and I felt like there was some minor kind of commotion about this one, but I didn't really expect it to get the response that it got. But it was like the kind of record that a lot of publications were already kind of championing even before it got released. But I think it's, it justifies it, right? I don't even think it's like an R&B record necessarily. I mean, I think I've seen that thrown around a little bit, but I just don't see it. But
I think a lot of records coming out in R&B and hip hop are just, they're not really conforming to these traditional tags. They're showing a lot more, and this is one of those. It's quite a diverse record. There's a lot of ideas. It's quite an interesting companion piece to Wesley Joseph, I think, as well. I think I've listened to it once, but it's been such a busy month. It's been such a busy month. There's been so much music in 28 days that have warranted attention, but I'll definitely be revisiting it based on my first listen.
Yeah, no, and it's great. I mean, she has a lot of personality, which is what I really like about it. And it's like kind of the kind of record where it infuses a lot of things. It kind of goes into a little bit of underground jazz. There's like, these like dynamic shifts in terms of sonic sounds throughout the record. It's not a dour record at all. Like it, she's not she's unafraid of just like going more on the more upbeat side of things. So this one also I feel will grow on me. I think I've read in some places that it's a little fragmented, but I think that kind of adds to the flavor of the album. And I also like the title too, Girl in the Half Pearl. I think it's like one of the better album titles that I've heard in a while. So
yeah, I think last time we did this roundup, we didn't mention any of the titles, so we made it slightly more difficult for people to check things out. So that is a good little nudge. So kind of partially moving away from hip hop, although there is an overlap. The next record I wanted to talk about was the Algiers record. There is some crossover, but there's again, talk about records with a lot going on. This is sort of very, very diverse, and they pack a lot in. I'm not sure it always works. Sometimes I think it really misses the mark, but there are moments on this record. I think it's a record of moments where things do sort of sing and connect. But I think there's a little bit too many misses for me to really take it to heart, I think.
Yeah, I can see that. But at the same time, those highs that you're kind of talking about, I wouldn't say blown away necessarily, but I was pleasantly surprised. I feel like normally Algiers, like with past albums, they've usually gone on the more confrontational side, and this one has that element to it, but I mean more so in the sound of the record. Like this one, it's a little bit less menacing. It's more seeing a little bit of that light instead of necessarily or trying to find solutions. I know they're a very political band, and they've always been that way, but I think that they're kind of shifting their politics a little bit, and even if it can be a little heavy-handed at times, I did see that. But in other ways it's effective too, I thought.
Yeah, I think I felt the same about the politics. I mean, you sometimes I bemoan the lack of politics in music because there's so much to get worked up about. But then when I hear a political record, I often think, oh, it's just a little bit forced. And there's a really fine line, I think, with nailing a really good political record. And there are moments where it's powerful, and some of the spoken word segments I think are quite quite affecting, but some of them seem a little bit trying too hard to kind of hit that mark. So it's a good record. I think it's worth checking out for the moments for me, but probably not something I'm going to be talking about come end of year time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I remember this one having samples too. I feel like this has been like the year in rock music of hearing samples.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it next month, but there's an album by a band called Zulu, which also uses a lot of samples. And we'll talk about that one next month.
The other thing it has is a lot of cameo appearances as well. There's so many guest appearances from Billy Woods is on there on one of the standout tracks, and Zach De La Rocha, who I'm never particularly pleased to see popping up on a record, but he's on there too, with his Achilles injury and everything, not holding him back, which is great to hear. So we're going to move on to a few of the bigger rock records of the month. The first one, and again, I'm surprised I even find myself talking about a Paramore record, but you encouraged me to give it a chance, and I was very surprised to find I liked what I heard, really. I enjoyed. This was a fun record.
It is, and I mean, full disclaimer, never been a big Paramore fan either. I mean, I think they're the kind of band that, like, in the early aughts, I was in a very different headspace. Whereas I feel like a lot of people of our generation were maybe like in the early 2000s, maybe skewing a little younger than us, but I feel like it was still part of the zeitgeist, right? Like this like emo revival that was kind of happening within a lot of the like post-punk revival stuff. I feel like I couldn't really connect with it because it seemed a little bit more juvenile, and I guess when you're like in college you feel like, oh, I'm better than this, right? But you know, like natural reactions. But I feel like Paramore always had something there, even if I didn't necessarily connect with it. And I think them being slightly younger than me, I think they're in their early to mid 30s at this point. They're kind of capturing the sounds of the post-punk revival in a very fun way. And you know, they're a really solid band in terms of how they sound. I mean, the guitar work is really good, and I mean, again, like most of my complaints with these albums, once again, have to do with like the politics. They're a little bit kind of, you know, they just seem a little forced to me. But I feel like I connect more when Hayley Williams, who's the front man, kind of talks more about her you know, her discontents and talking about her own personal tribulations that she's kind of going through. But yeah, you can't deny how fun this record is.
Yeah, I mean, some of the lyrics are a little bit, again, like you say, they don't quite hit the mark, and on such a polished record they really pop, so you really notice when the lyrics are a bit clunky, I think. But there is a line about I think she's singing about her social life being reduced to an appointment with the chiropractor, which is a 41-year-old with back pain I can strongly relate to. So I thought there was a little bit of self-deprecation and a bit of fun there. I think sometimes we judge these bigger mainstream rock records a little bit hard we're a little bit harsher than we are on more of an underground record. So
I think so.
A small indie band or some of the new sort of wave of post-punk bands coming along can put some terrible lyrics together, but we kind of give them a pass, whereas we you know, Paramore does it and we're like, oh yeah, of course, mainstream rock. And I think this is a fun record. There's no two ways about it. And I think you can write it off or you can just get on board and take it for what it is. And I think I prefer to do the latter, really.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's a fair assessment. I mean, I think I'm being a little bit more cognizant about bad lyrics in indie records too, which I think maybe would fly like in the past, but I think I've shifted.
Yeah, it's time to call them out, isn't it?
Yeah, it's time to call them out.
Yeah, just because you're mumbling it or speaking
or being abstract, right?
Yeah. Speaking it in your regional accent doesn't change it into a good lyric. Right. Yeah. Anyway, so from one sort of mainstream success to a critical success. Probably the record that everyone has been talking about in music critic circles this month is Caroline Polachek. It's her second solo record. It's created quite a fuss, quite a lot of 10 out of 10 ratings. We talked about it a little bit on the main podcast.
Yeah.
Gabby reviewed it for No Ripcord and had mixed feelings about it. I actually quite like it, and I've been on a bit of a journey with this record. So yeah, can you remember it's probably been a little while since you listened to it, about 20 albums ago.
Probably 20 albums ago sounds pretty accurate, but you know what, David, I'm glad you went on this journey, and I'm glad it's kind of grown grown on you. I don't think it has from the last time I heard it. I still struggle with how the innovations of this record are precisely that, innovations. I don't really see anything here that, or hear anything that I would find distinctive in 2023. I feel like people are just kind of overestimating it. And again, I will continue to fight this fight. And at least try to give it more chances. And but I don't know, like just like the tepid kind of late 90s stuff kind of rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah.
And like, Sunset is probably one of the worst songs that I've heard this year, and I can't even approach it like anymore. I just don't even bother. But you know what? I will try. I will continue to try.
I think you should. I can see you come summer strolling down the beach, drink in hand, just bouncing along to the flamenco guitars of Sunset.
Oh gosh,
it's
no.
going to happen. It's going to win you over. I know it is.
You know what? I've seen maybe Florida in the summer. Maybe I'll go to Margaritaville. Maybe I will find Jimmy Buffett somewhere. We'll have some drinks, and maybe we'll listen to Caroline Polachek, and maybe it'll finally hit for me. So I don't know.
It's a stretch, but it could happen. I mean,
Yeah.
there are some. I definitely agree. It's not a perfect record. I don't think it's the huge innovation that people are saying it is, but I think there's a lot of strong songs on there. There are some that took a while to win me over, and some that really did take even longer. I mean, I think the Grimes and Dido track was the last one where I kind of got over the hump with it and thought, yeah, I quite like this actually. It's got that quite jarring breakbeat, and then it's got Dido singing over the top of it, and it feels really 1990s. But
for sure,
there's something about it that does get to you in the end. But there are a few just very, like you said, tepid, pedestrian fillers that I can't see how they fit in with some of the other tracks. I really like Bunny as a Rider. I'd like more of that kind of urgent modern pop. But
production, Did you like Dido back in the day, David? It never really cut off. She's like one of those artists that I feel like weirdly I liked a lot of music from that scene, but Dido never really hit for me.
No. I mean, no, definitely not. But it's interesting, isn't it? A very interesting collaboration there. It's kind of like, the Boy Genius B team in a way.
Really? That's another one.
Well, we'll save that for later in the year. Yeah, that should be a fun discussion. Other rated records of the month. We've got Young Fathers. I know you really enjoyed that. I was less blown away, but I think it's a joyous, optimistic record with some real range again demonstrated.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a huge departure from Cocoa Sugar, which I remember that I reviewed, but I see that as a positive since I feel the quality control on that one was quite high. And I would say the same thing about this one. It's kind of sad that we didn't get to cover it because I didn't want to have that obligation of writing about Young Fathers again.
Yeah.
But I don't know, that trio is always so passionate. And this new LP is really no exception. I mean, I don't know, they just make these very fun sonic experiments. And some of the tracks are more glammy, others are more utilize like these very clever and ethereal harmonies too. And it just doesn't relent from beginning to end. And it just, I don't know, I keep piecing things about this album that continue to impress me. And I don't know, like Young Fathers are in this weird space where they are like loved by the Mercuries and that kind of thing. But I don't think they necessarily they tend to be more definitely on the British side in terms of critical acclaim. I don't think the US has caught, I don't know, maybe there's a disconnect there, but I don't think the US press has been as effusive about
and they don't sound very very much like a just a British concern. You know, it's something that there's a universal sound. It's a big sound. It's joyous. It's big. They don't hold back. You know, everything. They're going for it on every track on that record. And I'm surprised it hasn't kind of cut through to a bigger audience yet. I think
for sure.
And I thought this might be the record to do it. There's some huge tunes on there that could really break out, I think, in the right circumstances. So that was Young Fathers. Let's go to your album of the month, which I think anyone who follows No Ripcord and reads our reviews will not be surprised about. Do you want to tell us
all of you? You all listen to, you all read No Ripcord here.
Everyone does,
everyone does.
So tell us, what is your record of February 2023?
It's no surprise. It's Andy Shauf to begin. I'm going to try to not talk about Andy in every single podcast, and I think that's why I kind of refrained myself. I think in the 10 out of 10 discussion that we had in a previous podcast, I only alluded to it, but I didn't necessarily want to talk about the strong aspects of the record, and I think this is the opportunity for me. I mean, if anyone doesn't know about Andy Shauf, he's kind of like this wunderkind, right? He writes pretty much everything on his records, from the guitars, the clarinet, to keys. Like, he does it all. But I feel like he raises the benchmark in terms of singer-songwriter records for a modern time. And I think in the 10 out of 10 discussion, I think one of the things that I talked about is, can an artist excel in a particular genre where I feel like you can't make anything better, or I feel like the artistic quality just feels unmatched and you can't necessarily do anything, or, you know, it just peaks, right? And I think Shauf's album, it's called Norm, just kind of reminds me of my favorite 70s singer-songwriter records in a very different way. I put it in the same spectrum as Pink Moon by Nick Drake, Tim Buckley's debut, which we've talked about Jeff Buckley, but we haven't talked about my favorite Buckley in this podcast. Harry Nilsson's Aerial Ballet is another one that I really put up there in some of my favorite singer-songwriter records. And he doesn't sound like any of them necessarily. I mean, there are some elements here and there, but he really is doing something different. And the production, he worked in the mixing and production element. He worked with Neil Pogue, who actually worked on that Tyler, the Creator album that I really like called Flower Boy. And I think even if they don't sound the same, you can really hear a commonality in terms of the production, in terms of how he manages like a certain groove, and like he prioritizes space and minimalism. And I think Andy, just because it kind of suits his personality in terms of songwriting, I think he does a really wonderful job at that. And just to kind of wrap it up maybe into a little bow, or I don't know, it's I don't know, I'm just continually impressed by him. I saw him live and I'm still piecing together new things about it. It sounded jazzier live too. It's not that he made something very different. It's just, it was a slightly slower, more in tune with the band.
Mm.
But yeah, like the quality of this record is pretty much unparalleled for me. And yeah, oh, and great story too. Great story too. I guess the only thing I can say about it without like spoiling anything is that if the music is very pleasant, the lyrical content necessarily isn't. So there's a dichotomy there that he works really well in the production and in the lyrical content too.
I'm also a sucker for this kind of record, and I think early 70s singer-songwriter material, some of those records, just they're such a joy to listen to, aren't they? There's so many depths, the arrangements, and it was a great era for that kind of music, and this harks back to it without being a pastiche of that era.
Right.
I really enjoyed it. I'm not sure I'm on the 10 on the 10 trend, but I think that's like a really, we talked about it, it's a personal kind of rating, but this is one of the records of the year, I'm sure.
I wouldn't expect that from anyone either. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm like this Andy Shauf super fan either. I think The Magician is like the perfect Andy Shauf song, but I feel like the album that it comes from, The Party, is probably one of my least favorite Andy Shauf albums.
That is an amazing song. I remember you playing that actually when we were driving around Sheffield. You put The Magician on.
I did. Oh yeah.
And I think that was my introduction to him actually.
Nice.
And I agree, that is still like the quintessential song, isn't it? That if you're gonna, distill what he's all about into one song to try and win someone over, it would be that.
Absolutely. And funnily enough, like he played an encore, and that's the only song he played in the encore. So
that's it. He's a master. He's a master of his craft. He knows exactly what he's doing. Brilliant. Well, great to hear about that record in a bit more detail. I'll tell you my record of the month after a short break. Welcome back to Quarantine the Past's February album roundup. I'm joined with Juan Rodriguez, and I'm going to tell you about my album of the month now, which again, readers of No Record will not be surprised to know that it is Hamish Hawk's Angel Numbers. So Hamish Hawk, for those who aren't aware of him, which may be quite a few listeners actually, because he seems to still be largely a British kind of concern at the moment. He's an Edinburgh-based singer-songwriter. He's also got some heritage from New Zealand, which might help win Juan over a little bit. I know you love that New Zealand sound. And he's built up a steady reputation with lots of self-released material and working on Bandcamp, things like that. He released his first more widely available record, Heavy Elevator, a couple of years ago, which attracted some acclaim. Started making his way onto the Six Music playlist and picking up some support slots and making a name for himself. But this record really seems to have certainly captured the attention of music critics, and it's really built quite an impressive set of high ratings. It's actually sitting at the top of the album of the year ratings as we record now, which is quite an impressive achievement for an artist that is not that well known beyond these shores. But I just love this record. It is really just he's a very unique voice, although his actual singing voice has been much compared to lots of other different artists. This is very much Hamish Hawk. He's got his own sound. He's got this very erudite approach to songwriting. The lyrics are really densely layered. There's lots of little stories and world creations going on the record. He's not scared of big choruses and going anthemic and going big. This isn't sort of morose singer-songwriter territory. This is kind of reaching for the stars. And he's got the vocal chops to pull it off really a lot of the time. I think although the record doesn't sound a lot like pulp. I think that might be the closest touchstone. If you think about some of the big pulp singles, it's got that similar kind of vibe to it. I just think it's a really, really fun record. And I just get the feeling that Hamish Hawk's only starting to get going, really. I think he's got plenty more where this came from, and I look forward to seeing what he comes up with next. So what was your take on this one, Juan?
Yeah, you know what? I used to, as you know, I used to listen to Six Music a lot. I don't know why maybe it's just from working from home or something, but I should get back to it. But I feel like this is the kind of artist that if I were listening to maybe Mark Riley or Gideon Coe or something, like they would have like introduced me to Hamish Hawk. And I feel like I learned about him too late. I don't know. I feel like I feel a little left out, but you know what?
Yeah.
I'm catching up now, and I really like this record a lot. I don't really have any objections about it. I think even if I wouldn't rate it a 9 necessarily, I think it's pretty up there for me. I mean, Hamish does have a very particular voice, and I'm still wrapping my head around it. I don't love it, but I can see it growing on me for sure. I don't think it's necessarily it's his vocal delivery I do like, though. Maybe it's the pitch or something that because I do love any singers who kind of have that quality where they have like that sing speak kind of storytelling quality. And you know, there's the Rod Jones connection, which you told me, you know, from Idlewild fame, which is a band that I love too, and Roddy Woomble does the same thing. They're both very similar in that respect. So I think he really did a very smart thing in bringing Rod, because he knows how to, you know, work with Roddy in that sense. And I think he does the same with Hamish.
I think he's done a great job production-wise as well. It's a really warm-sounding record. There's some really, and I think Rod is playing the organ on there as well and chipping in musically. So it's and I think Hamish seems to be very respectful of. I think he just seems like a guy who's sort of still pinching himself to be working with the guy from Idlewild. You know, I think he just seems really pleased with how everything's going and just happy to be there, really. And that comes across.
Yeah, I feel like this album should be cat bait for me for other reasons too. Like the songs are very anthemic, and I like a lot of them. I don't like all of them, but I like most of them. But I like the weirder songs that kind of go into 90s territory, like Angel Numbers.
Yeah.
The title track is very cool. Also, he has a track called Bridget St. John, which should be like the biggest bait for me, because I am a big fan of that English songwriter, and I'm going to do a quick show and tell. This is my favorite album by St. John. So yeah, I mean, there's many reasons for me to like Hamish. It seems like we're in a similar wavelength in terms of and I will continue to really dig into the lyrical content, because I think that's the missing piece for me in many ways. Again, like there's some vocal affectations there that kind of bug me a little bit, whatever. But you know what? I think it'll continue to resonate with me as time goes on, and I've heard it quite a bit. And really everything you wrote about it, I mostly agree with. I mean, I think you justified your point in your review really well. And yeah, I mean, that's what I think.
Good. I'm always rooting for Rod Jones. I think I interviewed Idlewild, and he was such a lovely chap, and I'm really pleased that he's knocked it out of the park on the production here as well. So that's great to see. So yeah, definitely, if you haven't heard it, check it out. If you like your anthems big and catchy, but also clever and with depth, I think this is a record for you. Yeah. Good. So moving on to a band that probably have never recorded an anthem, Yo La Tengo.
Yo La Tengo, yeah.
With their
I don't think so.
50th album or something of Yo La Tengo.
I think it's their 17th.
17th.
Close enough.
I know I'm being slightly over dramatic, but I just thought this was it was a Yo La Tengo album. I enjoyed it. There's some good stuff on there. There's some better than good stuff on there, but it kind of passed me by, and I didn't really feel like the world had changed too much from listening to it. It did what it said on the tin, really. I don't know if I'm missing
Yeah.
something or if that's unfair.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there is a truth to that, and I don't think this is the kind of album that if we would review it, I would like hype it, even if I think it's a really good one. But yes, Yolo Tango always sounds like Yolo Tango, but I feel like it's a bit of a departure from their last two records, which were more ambient. There's a riot going on, which I may have written about. I don't remember. I think I did. And Fade, which is like two of my favorite ones that they've done. And it's kind of, I think this one has resonated with more people because it has a little bit more of that unhinged quality of their 90s and even 2000 records. Like, I Am Not Afraid of You, I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One, even popular songs. I feel it has more of that commonality as opposed to maybe something a little bit like the ones that I mentioned and oh man, what's that album that's like really like down tempo and Nothing Turned Inside Out or something? I think that's the name of it. But I think you can put like, that's the way to qualify Joe Tingo, right? Like, do they have like these like guitar freakouts or do they not? And I think, and this one has like more of those like fuzzier, like really long song experiments, like to kind of go with like the more soothing songs that they always write.
I like the guitar freakouts. But at this point, you know, and I think I've seen them live, really enjoyed them. I think they come into their own live, and they've got such a rich catalogue to pull from. But yeah, I mean, I find it just hard to get too excited about a new record from them because at this point, it's not going to be something massively new, and I can always just listen to their old ones. So but yeah, it's a strong record. There's nothing wrong with it. Another band who I thought released a great record this month that are moving in new directions is Shame. I think I said I'd review it and didn't get round to it, but I did finally.
There's always time. It's not completely.
Yeah, maybe I will, because I kind of thought this was a really interesting step forward. It feels like they were one of the first bands over the last sort of 4 or 5 years that really started digging into that sort of slightly more dissonant post-punk. The first two records were quite reminiscent of The Fall. They were quite edgy and political and quite jarring at times. This one it feels like they're spreading their wings and embracing melody and even going anthemic at times.
I agree.
in that way, it reminds me a little bit of Ice Age, who followed a similar path because they were challenging to listen to on their debut, and they were also a very young band. And then by album number 3, you know, throwing open the curtains, letting some light in, and playing around with making rock songs, and this is a really refreshing record, really.
It's a similar arc to Ice Age for sure, but I feel like this album is the one where I feel like it'll start pissing off the old fans for like deviating from their more primitive punk sound, which so similar to the Murder Capital, they're really expanding their sound, right? The production is great. Flood produced it, so you're definitely going to see a lot of nuances in the production. And yeah, they're really going for it. Like some tracks are even acoustic. There's like 1 or 2 tracks that are acoustic. And they're slow, but they get visceral too. You know, they're not necessarily like slow songs either. So they're doing some really interesting stuff here, and I think objectively I like it more than their previous one, even if I think it's better in quality, even if I adore that album too.
I feel like I respected the last one, but I like this one a little bit more.
That makes sense.
And even a band like Idlewild followed a similar arc from that early punkier stuff to becoming a bigger picture kind of band. Although obviously Shame started at a slightly more dissonant post-punky kind of place.
Absolutely, I'm not a fan of their debut, but you know, it's
I like seeing a band being unafraid though to take these steps and develop, you know, and if you piss a few people off, you're probably doing the right thing, isn't it? Rather than just basking in that comfort zone. So definitely one of the stronger picks of the month for me. I think we're just going to do a quick blast through some of the other records now, just a brief comment, really, if you like. We'll start with US Girls, another new record from Meg and Remy. What did you think of that one?
I mean, you know what? I like it a lot. Maybe I don't like it as much as other albums. I don't know. I'm an oddball. I think Half Free is still her best record, which is more experimental. But I think it's just fun. You know, I like that she's like doing this kind of 80s leaning synth pop that sounds a little like cheesy and mawkish a little bit, but I like that about her. I don't know, like she like goes into these like very unpredictable directions. I think it's just a quality control in terms of the songs. I think like half of it is really strong and the rest doesn't really do it for me, I think.
Yeah, but worth a listen for the strong half, isn't it? Alone, I mean, I prefer an uneven record that has highs to a record that's just mediocre throughout. I really liked Future's Bet as well. I thought that was a really good song.
Oh yeah, that one's a good one.
So that was US Girls. We've got Kelela. I know you quite liked this record. Smooth, down tempo, interesting.
Yeah, I feel like this is the kind of record that a lot of people may think that there's not a lot going on, because it does kind of put you in this headspace, more meditative kind of headspace. But there's like and some of the dancier elements can be a little leaning into cliche, I think. But it does enrapture you. I felt some moments throughout. It's a long record, but I felt like there were moments where I was just like completely enraptured with the sound and what she was trying to convey. And even if it sounds a little more ambient and down tempo, I think she's really doing something interesting here, even if I don't necessarily think it's like one of the top albums necessarily, but I think it's still worth a listen.
I think it's an album rather than a collection of moments. There aren't really that many moments on there. I think it's something that you put on and listen to the whole piece, really.
Yeah, I agree.
But I thought it was pretty solid. Tennis, I haven't heard this one. I've checked out their earlier work, but I haven't heard the new one.
I can talk about it a little bit. I mean, Tennis have been around for a while, since the 2000s or the aughts, I guess. It's like the duo of Elena Moore and Patrick Riley, not to be confused with the former basketball coach, for those who like American sports. I felt like I wrote this band off after their 2017 release, Yours Conditionally, and I feel like they've gradually like won me again with their last two records. And to put it very simply, there's just a togetherness that is truly felt in their music. Like we hear about that, you know, you hear about all these married couples doing music together. And I feel like there's like that kinship, and that chemistry is just something that really resonates for me. And yeah, they're not doing anything like super innovative, but they're writing really strong songs. And again, it's kind of like a 7 out of 10 record out of me. But I feel like even doing this exercise of listening to a bunch of albums, I keep returning to my favorite songs of this record, and that's always a good sign. So give it a listen. You know, it won't blow your mind, but you might find a good song here to like put in an indie pop playlist.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we will be putting a song from each record into a playlist, so you can kind of sample it. And I think again, it's a good record to pick from. As you've described it. Death Valley Girls, we talked about on the other podcast, so we won't over-egg that one, but I thought a very solid record. They very, very capable band who know exactly what they're doing and deliver, really. I think it's an impressive, cohesive record with a couple of real standout tracks. So check that one out as well. Pile, I know, was another record that you really enjoyed. I only checked it out for the first time today and was quite, I don't know why I was pleasantly surprised. You told me it was good, and it was good.
Yeah, I wrote a quick take, and I'm gonna probably like write a couple more quick takes because I'm kind of catching up. But yeah, Pile is interesting. They used to be more of like a slightly more post-hardcore, but in a very in a more kind of this band is really hard to explain to people. And I feel like with this one, they do take turns that are a little bit more accessible, but it still sounds very much like I feel like if you like Hail to the Thief kind of Radiohead, I think you'll dig this album, because it does have like that quality where the lyricism is abstract, but at the same time the music also take these interesting detours, even slightly industrial too. So give it a shot. I mean, this band is kind of a working person's kind of band. They just keep doing album after album, and I feel like they don't have like their like definitive record or essential record, but I think they're doing really good records overall.
We've got Graham Coxon's new project. I'm apologizing in advance if I pronounce it wrong, but I think it's the I think it's the Waeve. I feel like the E is silent.
Instead of Weave, right?
I've never been a huge fan of Graham Coxon's solo work. In fact, I'm not a massive Blur fan either, but so I haven't heard this, but I hear from you and Gabby that it is a good record.
Yeah, it's really good, and I need to listen to this one more. But I think if you like a more modern interpretation of what like Gainsbourg was doing with Jane Birkin, I feel like there's a commonality there in terms of like I mean, he's not a crooner, he's a terrible singer, I have to say, sorry, but you're not listening for his singing, right? You're kind of listening to like the sonic accoutrements that they kind of bring into the album. And again, it's like one of those records where maybe if you finish it, you don't necessarily remember it in terms of like a single track standing out, because it's kind of the longer songs that are better here. But yeah, give it a shot. I mean, just like many of you, if you haven't heard it, I have to give it more listens. But I was pleasantly surprised from just one listen. So.
Yeah, and the last record that I was going to talk about, this one was recommended to me by Gabby, so I thought it would be rude not to give it a shout out. It is by an Irish band, and we've been doing our best to big up the Irish music scene over the last few months on the podcast, called Male. That's Mhaol, Male. And their debut album is called Attachment Styles. It's a very punk, very feminist record. We talked about Algiers and the quite big political vision. This is much more personal politics. I think it's much more about feminism and experiences with terrible men and attitudes and things like that, which we've touched upon with bands in the past. They do it really well. I like the way the sort of activist bent doesn't override the musicality on the record. They deliver really impressive, catchy punk tunes first, and the activist lyrics are part of the package, but not at the expense of the tunes. So I think it's a really strong, punchy debut, and just a fast, breezy listen if you want some good punk music. So that is a little shout out for Male. Check them out, and thanks for the tip, Gabby. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the roundup. I think we rattled through almost an album a day for the whole of February, which is quite an achievement.
It was a good month, though.
It was a great month. It was a really good month.
I mean, I feel, full disclaimer, I don't think March will be as impressive, to be honest, because it's already gone into a bit of a slow start, and I haven't heard anything that's coming out in the future yet that has really like inspired me in the same way January and February did. But you know what? Maybe we have less work to do then.
And maybe
a little break, right?
And maybe we can enjoy catching up with some of these February records that we haven't perhaps listened to as much as we would have liked to. So great, always good fun talking about new releases, and we'll be back again next month for more of the same. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Juan.